This Shabbat, we read from Parshat Shoftim and receive details about how the world of justice that we are charged with creating might be organized. This includes instruction of both religious and secular legislation amongst judges, in courts of law, the cities of refuge, for Israelites who unintentionally commit grave offenses, and concludes with the laws which are to be followed during times of peace and during times of war. And in the course of setting out the laws of war, the Torah adds a seemingly minor detail that becomes the basis of a much wider field of human responsibility and is of a major consequence today. This passage concerns a military campaign involving laying siege to a city. As it's written, when you lay siege to a city for a long time, fighting against it to capture it, do not destroy its trees by putting an axe to them, because you can eat their fruit. Do not cut them down. Are the trees people that you should besiege them? However, you may cut down trees that you know are not fruit trees, and you can use them to build siege works until the city at war with you falls. The Torah implies that war is inevitably destructive. That is why Judaism's highest value is that of peace. Nonetheless, there is a difference between necessary and needless destruction. Trees are a source of wood for siege works, and some trees, those that bear fruit, are also a source of food. Therefore, we cannot destroy them. We cannot needlessly deprive ourselves of a productive resource. In other words, do not engage in a scorched earth tactic in the course of war. The sages of our people saw in this command something more than a detail of the laws of war. They saw it as a binyan av, a specific example of a much more general principle. They called this rule bal tashchit, the prohibition against needless destruction of any kind. And the great Maimonides comments on the concept of bal tashchit, saying, not only does this apply to trees, but also whoever breaks a vessel or tears a garment, destroys a building, blocks a wellspring of water, or destructively wastes food. Those transgress the command of bal tashchit. This is the halachic basis of an ethic of ecological responsibility. Bal tashchit is the religious foundation of an environmentally cautious Judaism. The late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks teaches on this subject, saying that the first and foremost, we must accept the fact that the earth is not ours. It belongs to its creator, to God. That is the point of the first chapter of the Torah. In the beginning, God created. God made it, therefore God is entitled to lay down the conditions within which we live in it as guests. The logic of this is immediately played out in the first two chapters of Genesis. From the very first humans. Bereshit 1, God commands humanity, saying, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and every living creature that moves on the ground. The words subdue and rule are verbs of dominance. And then in Genesis 2, the text uses two quite very different words. God placed Adam in the garden, la'ovda, to serve it, and l'shomra, to guard it. This is the language of responsibility. The first term, la'ovda, tells us that humanity is not just the master, but also the servant of nature. The second, l'shomra, is the term used in later biblical legislation to specify responsibilities of one who undertakes to guard something that is not their own, right? Something that you are guarding that you do not own yourself. So how are we to understand the tension here of these two opening chapters? Simply, Bereshit 1 tells us about creation and nature, the reality mapped by the natural sciences. It speaks about biological species, about humanity, Homo sapiens. What is distinctive about humans as a species is precisely our power of dominating nature, of exercising control of the forces that shape the physical world. And by contrast, Bereshit 2 is about morality and responsibility. It tells us about the moral limits of power. It reinforces, and this is something we've heard over and over again over these last few 18 months, that just because we can does not mean that we should. When it comes to matters of our earth, this sacred shared space of all of the human race, we have the power but not the permission. We have the ability but not the right to dominate. The earth is not ours. It belongs to God who made it. Therefore, we are not the owners of nature, but its custodians, and we are here to serve it and care for it. And that is a message that humanity needs to hear at this moment. The former president of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel, made a fundamental point in his book titled The Art of the Impossible. Mr. Havel writes, "I believe that we have little chance of averting an environmental catastrophe unless we recognize that we are not the masters of being, but only a part of being." That is what and why a religious community should care about the environment, why a religious vision is so important, reminding us that we are not owners of our resources. They belong not to us, but to eternity. Hence, we may not needlessly destroy. If that applies in war, how much more so in times of peace? The psalmist writes that the earth is the Lord's and all that is in it. We are its guardians on behalf of our Creator for the sake of future generations and in the face of climate change. Hopelessness is simply not an option. We have a responsibility to take action, whether that is large or small. The Jewish tradition teaches us that we are not permitted to speak of a sick person if they are already dead or dying. And by extension, we should try practicing that with our earth as well. Parshat Shoftim provides us with this prominent phrase, Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. And with climate change happening at a truly alarming rate, it is imperative that we frame the work of green living, of environmental responsibility as a pursuit of justice. No longer can the preservation of the earth be purely about physical, about the nature, about the science. Torah teaches us through the concept of Bal Tashchit that we have an ethical, a political, and indeed a religious obligation to seek justice for our planet. And so I'm wishing you all, your families, and the earth itself a Shabbat Shalom.